The rain fell in gentle silver threads, painting the cobblestones with fleeting reflections of neon signs. Each drop seemed to echo the rhythm of her music, trembling on the air before it vanished into the wet night. Alina's fingers danced across the keys of a battered upright piano, one that had been abandoned at the corner of Marlow Street. Its notes raw, unpolished, yet piercingly beautiful. The melody was neither happy nor sorrowful. It was memory made tangible, the kind of music that lingered in the soul long after the final chord faded. Her coat, threadbare and damp, clung to her shoulders, and the hood did little to shelter her from the drizzle. But she didn't care. Music had always been her refuge, the one constant in a life that had been unkind and unpredictable. Around her, umbrellas and hurried footsteps blurred like ghosts, some pausing for a fraction of a moment to listen, then hurrying on. They could not understand what she poured into the piano, nor the quiet ache in her chest that had nothing to do with hunger or fatigue. Before we begin this story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now let's begin. Alina's gaze lifted briefly, as the sound of a car engine drew near. A sleek black vehicle, shining wetly under the streetlights, rolled to a slow stop across the street. Inside, a figure sat alone, hands folded, eyes hidden behind dark glasses despite the gloom. There was something about the way he watched her, a deliberate intensity that made her fingers falter for a moment. His presence was commanding yet quietly observant, the kind of presence that suggested a life built on power and control. A life completely unlike hers. She returned to the piano, letting the notes speak for her when words could not. But the man remained, the car idling like a shadow waiting for permission to move. And then, as abruptly as the engine had sounded, he disappeared into the drizzle, leaving behind a lingering sense of expectation, as though the night itself had whispered that someone extraordinary was passing through her ordinary life. Alina's eyes swept over the piano again, noticing for the first time the faint initials carved into the side, M.L. The marks were faint, eroded by time and weather, but somehow, in that dim light, they felt significant, as if the piano itself had been waiting for her. She pressed her fingers to the keys once more, coaxing a low, melancholy tune from the instrument, the sound mingling with the rain as though they had always belonged together. The music drew her into memory of evenings spent at the orphanage where her brother once played alongside her, laughing at the wrong notes, the way their mother had clapped in rhythm with small, delighted hands. Those memories were distant, fragile shards of warmth in the cold shadow of the life that had followed. She pushed them gently aside. There was no room for longing tonight, only the music, only the fleeting connection between herself and an audience that had come and gone in blurred streaks of color. Yet even as she played, Alina could not shake the feeling that someone had seen her in a way no passerby ever had. The man in the car, who had he been? Why had he stopped? And why did the memory of his dark, unreadable eyes linger with a weight she could not explain? Her chest tightened, but the piano demanded her attention, and she gave herself to it fully, each note a bridge between who she was and who she had almost forgotten she could be. Somewhere beyond the streetlights, a faint whisper of wind carried the echo of her melody, curling around corners, threading through alleys, and perhaps if fate allowed, finding its way into a life that was about to change irrevocably. The night stretched on. Alina played until the rain softened to mist, until the streets emptied, leaving only the music and her heartbeat to fill the quiet. And in that silence, a promise lingered, fragile, trembling, and utterly impossible to ignore. The following morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the gray clouds, casting a soft, diffused glow across Marlow Street. Alina had returned to her apartment, a cramped, narrow space that smelled faintly of old books and rain-soaked fabric. She had spent the night replaying the events of yesterday, the stranger in the car, his eyes dark and unreadable, the way he had seemed to see something inside her that no one else ever had. She shook her head, trying to dispel the feeling, but a quiet curiosity lingered, tugging at her with impossible insistence. And then, before she could even finish unpacking her modest breakfast of bread and tea, there came a knock at her door, one deliberate, insistent. Alina's heart fluttered nervously, and a chill ran down her spine. Visitors were rare in this part of the city, especially at this hour. When she opened the door, she froze. There, standing in the doorway, was a man she had never met before, yet somehow, she already knew him. The man's presence was like the quiet rumble of distant thunder, commanding without shouting, heavy with authority. Behind him, a gleaming black piano rested on a dolly, wheels poised as if it had been waiting for this very moment. I don't understand, Alina stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. This isn't mine. The man's eyes met hers, dark and piercing, yet softened by something she could not name. "It is now," he said simply, his voice low, smooth with the weight of inevitability. "Your music deserves more than the streets. Play for me, whenever you like, wherever you are." I want to hear it properly." Alina's mind raced. Who was this man? A benefactor? A patron? Or something else entirely? There was a danger in his presence, a silent warning she could not ignore, and yet beneath it, a pull she could not resist, the sort of pull that felt like fate tugging at the edges of her carefully guarded life. "I can't accept this," she said, shaking her head, her hands brushing against the polished wood of the piano as though it might burn her. "I don't even know your name." He smiled faintly, a shadowed expression that hinted at humor and something dark. "Luca Moretti," he said, as if the name alone would explain everything. "You may not know me, but I know you. I heard you yesterday, and I could not stop thinking about the way you played. It was unlike anything I have ever heard." Alina's fingers trembled. The piano, so large and out of place in her small apartment, seemed to hum beneath her touch. She imagined the notes she had coaxed from it yesterday, the music that had carried her sorrow, her memory, her secret hope. Could she trust this man, this stranger who moved through her life like a storm she hadn't anticipated? "I don't know why you would care," she said, voice barely steady. I'm just a girl playing a piano on the street. It doesn't mean anything to anyone." "Everything means something," he replied quietly, his gaze unwavering. "To the right person, every note tells a story, and your story, it matters." For a long moment, Alina said nothing. She traced the edge of the piano, the smooth grain of its surface under her fingers, and she felt an unexpected warmth, not just from the wood but from the weight of his attention, from the unspoken understanding that someone out there in a world so far removed from hers had seen her, truly seen her. Finally, she spoke, hesitant but curious. Why me?" Luca paused, the corner of his mouth lifting in something close to a smile. "Because you're not like anyone I've ever met, and because for once, I want to be part of something that isn't controlled by my world. Something real." "That's you, Alina. Something real." Her breath caught. Real. The word lingered, echoing in the small apartment. In a life filled with survival and shadows, had she ever known something real? Perhaps not. And yet, standing here with a stranger who spoke in truths she had not dared to imagine, Alina felt the faintest flicker of hope. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys. The piano responded, almost as if it had been waiting for her to play again. And when the first note rose into the quiet morning air, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that the world outside could be dangerous, that she could be vulnerable, and that still, in this small moment, they could share a fragment of something extraordinary. Luca watched silently, his hands folded, a shadow of emotion playing across his face. He did not touch the piano, did not intervene. He merely listened, as he had listened yesterday, letting the music speak for what words could not. And in that music, Alina felt something shift within herself, a spark of courage, of curiosity, of longing she had tried to bury long ago. The first step had been taken. The piano sat in her apartment, a symbol of chance, of destiny, of danger and possibility all at once. And Alina knew, even as her fingers trembled over the keys, that life as she had known it was about to change forever. The bell above the cafe door jingled as Alina stepped inside, shaking off the drizzle that clung stubbornly to her coat. The warmth of the interior was almost painful in contrast to the damp streets outside, but it was a welcome relief. Her hands still bore the faint smell of rain, of wet pavement, of the piano she had touched earlier that morning. And yet, even in this small sanctuary, she felt the ghost of his presence, the memory of Luca's dark eyes, like a shadow tracing her every step. He was already there, seated at a corner table, hands folded, posture as composed as ever. The low hum of conversation and clinking cups seemed to part around him, as though the world acknowledged that some presence demanded its own space. Luca Moretti did not rise when she approached. He did not need to. He merely tilted his head slightly, the faintest invitation, and the air between them thickened with unspoken tension. "I didn't expect you to come," he said quietly, his voice smooth, controlled, carrying the faintest trace of amusement. "Or maybe, I hoped you." Alina's heart stuttered. There was something about the way he spoke, something that balanced power and vulnerability on a razor's edge. She slid into the chair opposite him, unsure whether to be braced or disarmed. I don't usually meet people like you, she admitted, her voice low. People who see you before you even speak. He let out a soft, almost imperceptible laugh. And yet here you are. His eyes lingered on her hands, delicate and worn from years of playing on streets and in quiet apartments alike. I wanted to hear you play, but I also wanted to see you, properly, not just as a shadow in the rain. Alina looked down, tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She was aware of every detail, the smooth surface beneath her fingers, the faint aroma of roasted beans, the distant hum of the street outside. Her pulse quickened as she realized the weight of this encounter. This was no ordinary meeting. This was a collision of worlds. Her small, precarious, and fragile, and his vast, controlled and dangerous. And somehow in the quiet cafe, they existed together just for this moment. I don't know what to say, she whispered. It's not that people haven't listened before, but no one has heard me, really. Not like this. He leaned slightly forward, a rare softness breaking the mask of authority he always wore. Then I'll listen, he said simply. Because you deserve it, and because it matters to me. Alina's breath caught. His words were not grandiose. They were quiet, deliberate, and weighted with sincerity. And yet, behind them she sensed danger, the danger of opening herself to someone who belonged to a world she could barely comprehend. Every story she had ever been told about men like him screamed caution, whispered warnings she had long learned to obey. And yet, the pull was irresistible. Why me? She asked again, her curiosity a tremulous whisper. Why would someone like you care about me? Luca's gaze softened, but only for a fraction of a second. Because you are unpolished, honest. Music like yours isn't made by people who have everything handed to them, or by people who are trying to hide from the world. It comes from pain, from truth, and I recognize it, because I carry my own. A silence settled between them, thick and charged. Alina could feel the weight of his words pressing gently against her chest, almost unbearably close. She had spent her life defending herself, keeping the world at arm's length. Yet here was a man whose very presence seemed to pierce through every layer of caution she had built. Finally she dared a question that had been forming since the piano appeared in her apartment. What do you want from me? His eyes darkened, unreadable once more, and he leaned back slightly, letting the words settle like a storm on calm waters. Nothing, he said quietly, except for you to play, for me to hear you, and maybe for you to trust me, even if just a little. That's all I ask. Alina's fingers brushed against the edge of the table, trembling imperceptibly. She wanted to refuse him, to retreat into the safety of her small, solitary world. And yet, there was a pull she could not resist. The music they had shared yesterday, the piano in her apartment, the inexplicable weight of his gaze. It all demanded that she consider a life beyond the streets, beyond survival, beyond herself. I'll play, she said finally, her voice steadying with the decision. But this doesn't mean I trust you. Not yet. He nodded, as if he had expected her caution, and the faintest smile played at the corner of his lips. I wouldn't expect anything less. And in that quiet cafe, with the rain softening beyond the window and the aroma of coffee curling around them, a fragile thread began to form, a thread of possibility, of connection, of something neither of them could yet name. Alina knew with a sudden sinking awareness that life as she had known it was shifting beneath her feet, and for the first time in a long while she allowed herself a small trembling hope, that maybe, just maybe, she would survive the storm Luca brought into her life, and come out on the other side changed, not broke. The city never truly slept, but Alina's apartment felt like its own quiet universe, suspended between the soft hum of the street below, and the muted glow of a single lamp. Rain still clung to the windows, leaving faint streaks that caught the light like silver thread. She sat at the piano, fingers hovering above the keys, and for the first time she allowed herself to remember, not the music, but the life that had shaped her. Her brother's laughter echoed faintly in her memory, a sound she hadn't heard in years. Marco had been younger, mischievous, full of impossible ideas, and stubborn in ways she had secretly admired. Then the accident. The night that had shattered everything, the hospital corridors, the desperate calls, the silence that followed. It had left a wound that never fully healed. Music had become her refuge, her one place to speak without words,
to carry sorrow and hope together in chords that no one could ever truly steal. And now, Luca Moretti had entered her life. He was a man carved from shadows, rumored to command empires she could barely imagine. Yet, despite his reputation, there was something almost tender in the way he listened, something that suggested he too bore a private sorrow, a story hidden behind the polished exterior of wealth and power. She remembered their first meeting, the rain, the piano, the way his eyes had lingered on her hands as if they could see everything she had ever lost. A faint shiver ran down her spine, part anticipation, part fear. Trust had never come easily, and yet, here was a man who seemed to demand it simply by existing in the same room. Luca on the other side of the city sat in his office, dark wood and marble reflecting the faint city light. He had spent countless years building walls around his family, his business, his heart, and yet, since the night he had heard Alina play, those walls had begun to tremble. He thought of her often, not as a street musician or a curiosity, but as a force that challenged the rigid structures of his life. She reminded him of what he had lost, what he had never allowed himself to hope for. He touched the edge of a photograph on his desk, a picture of his mother, long gone, her eyes gentle, her hands folded in a way that spoke of quiet strength. Luca had grown up in a world of calculated decisions and unyielding power, where love was often mistaken for weakness. But Alina, she had stirred something inside him that was uncalculable, unpredictable and terrifying in its intensity. Days passed in a haze of shared music, fleeting conversations and stolen glances. Alina found herself recounting fragments of her past, not the darkest parts, not yet, but enough to let Luca glimpse the contours of her life. He in turn shared pieces of himself, carefully measured, enough to hint at the man behind the empire. They spoke of dreams deferred, of parents lost and loved ones gone, of moments that had shaped them without allowing the world to notice. Yet, beneath their careful exchanges lay tension. Alina felt it in the pause between his words, in the way his eyes darkened when something troubled him. Luca sensed it in her silences, in the way her fingers hesitated over the piano keys when a chord struck too close to memory. Both were aware of the danger, both external and internal, the world he commanded, the vulnerability she carried, and the inevitable collision of their paths. One evening, Luca visited Alina under the pretense of delivering a rare sheet of music he had obtained for her. The night was heavy with rain, streets reflecting neon signs like liquid stars. She opened the door, and for the briefest moment, the world narrowed to the two of them. "You're avoiding something," he said softly, his voice low enough that the rain outside could not carry it away. "Or maybe, you're trying to protect yourself from me." Alina hesitated, her fingers brushing the piano before she leaned back against it. "It's not you," she whispered. "It's everything else. I can't afford mistakes, not anymore. Not after everything I've lost." Luca nodded, understanding more than she could know. "I don't ask for your life," he said, "only that you allow me to hear your music, that's all. But I will wait. I'll respect your pace, even if it kills me." Her gaze met his, searching, questioning, and in that shared silence, a fragile thread formed. Trust, tentative and trembling, yet alive. Outside, the rain continued its soft rhythm, as if marking the beat of two lives slowly intertwining. In that quiet apartment, amid the scent of wet pavement and piano wood, Alina realized something profound. She could feel safe, for the first time in years, in the presence of someone who was by all accounts dangerous. Luca for his part understood that he had never before wanted something as fiercely as he wanted the trust of a woman who played the streets into silence. And so, beneath the soft patter of rain and the muted glow of lamplight, the first true bond between them began to grow, delicate, unspoken, and hauntingly beautiful. Night had fallen over the city like a velvet curtain, muffling the distant hum of traffic and the occasional shout of late wanderers. Alina sat at her piano, the soft glow of a single lamp casting elongated shadows across the apartment wall. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening like black glass under the streetlights. The quiet was almost sacred, and yet it was filled with anticipation, the kind that made her chest tighten without reason. A soft knock at the door drew her out of her thought. She opened it to find Luca standing there, his silhouette outlined by the dim hallway light. His eyes, dark and unreadable, softened when they met hers. There was no pretense tonight, no walls between them, only the unspoken acknowledgement of everything they had shared so far. "You're late," she teased softly, though her lips betrayed a small smile. "I don't measure time the way most people do," he said, stepping inside. "Besides, some things are worth waiting for." Her pulse quickened, a mixture of curiosity, caution, and something else she couldn't name. He moved past her, hands brushing lightly against the piano's polished surface. Elena's fingers itched to play, to let the music express what words could not. "Play for me," he said quietly. "I want to hear the night in your music." She sat down, and as her fingers found the keys, she felt a shift in the air, a delicate, electric current that tethered them together. The music was soft at first, tentative, like a confession whispered in darkness, and then it grew, swelling with emotion, carrying fragments of memory, longing, and the small fragile hope that life might offer more than survival. Luca watched in silence, the faintest shadow of emotion crossing his face. He had spent decades learning to control everything around him: business, people, even his own emotions. Yet here was a woman who moved through him, as effortlessly as her music filled the room. There was no calculation, no pretense, only honesty. And honesty, he realized, was rarer than gold. As the last note faded, Elena leaned back, exhaling slowly. "It's not perfect," she murmured, though there was a tremor of pride in her voice. "It's perfect," he said simply, "because it's yours. No one else could play it this way. No one else could make me feel what I feel right now." Her heart skipped. She wanted to retreat, to tell him that her life was too complicated, too fragile for someone like him, and yet, a small part of her, the part that had been lonely for too long, wanted to believe him. They sat in silence, the kind that does not need words, until Luca spoke again. "Do you ever wonder if life could be different, if we could be different?" Elena's hands hovered above the keys. "I think about it," she admitted, "all the time. But dreams don't always survive in the world I live in." "Maybe," he said, leaning slightly closer, "they survive if someone decides to protect them." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. Protection was not just a promise of safety, it was a declaration of intent, a willingness to shoulder risk, to bear the consequences of caring deeply. Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew that entering Luca's world, his empire, his life, would come with danger, and yet, the thought of not being near him, of not sharing these moments, felt equally unbearable. For hours, they spoke in whispers, about music, about loss, about fleeting hopes and long-buried fear. Elena learned fragments of Luca's past, a childhood bound by discipline and solitude, a world of loyalty and danger, a life that had never allowed him the luxury of vulnerability. She shared pieces of herself too, fragments that had been locked away, keys held close to her heart. With every story, every glance, every subtle touch of a hand near the piano, the thread between them grew tauter, binding them in ways neither could fully comprehend. And yet, tension remained, the kind that whispers caution, that reminds them that trust is earned slowly, painfully, and never fully guaranteed. Before he left that night, Luca reached for her hand, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. "I'll wait," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "I'll wait as long as it takes for you to trust me." Elena's breath caught. She wanted to pull away, to protect herself from the storm she knew he carried, and yet, she let her fingers linger against his, feeling the warmth, the promise, the dangerous pull of a life that could be entirely different from the one she had always known. As he stepped out into the night, she watched him go, the echoes of his presence, lingering in the room like the fading resonance of a piano note. Outside, the streets glistened under the streetlights, and she felt for the first time in years that the night was full of possibility, if only she dared to reach for it. The night of the gala arrived with a hush of anticipation, the city glittering beneath a crescent moon. Elena stood before the mirror in her small apartment, the dress she had borrowed from a friend swaying lightly around her legs. She barely recognized herself. The reflection that gazed back was polished, poised, and yet somehow still hesitant, as though she were stepping into a world that both mesmerized and terrified her. The black limousine waited outside, its polished surface reflecting the streetlights like liquid obsidian. Luca opened the door, hands folded with the calm authority that had first unsettled her on Marlowe Street. "Are you ready?" asked, his voice smooth, tempered, and impossibly commanding, Alina nodded, her pulse quickening. I think so, she whispered, climbing. The soft hum of the engine and the subtle scent of leather filled the space, blending with the residual memory of rain on streets she had walked countless times. Arriving at the mansion, she was swallowed by grandeur, crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and guests in gowns and tuxedos, all moving in practiced elegance. The world was a stark contrast to the streets she knew, yet every detail seemed alive, every corner a reflection of power and control. Alina felt out of place, yet inexplicably drawn, as though the walls themselves beckoned her to belong. Luca guided her through the crowd, introducing her with quiet authority. Whispers followed her passage. The street musician, the girl who had captivated the city's most infamous man. Yet Luca's eyes never left hers, grounding her, tethering her to a sense of presence that defied the opulence around them. Later, in a quiet alcove near the grand piano in the ballroom, Luca leaned slightly closer, just enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him. Do you feel it? He asked, a trace of amusement in his eyes. The difference between your world and mine. Alina nodded, her fingers brushing the polished ivory keys. It's overwhelming, she admitted. I don't know if I belong here. You belong wherever you decide to be, Luca said softly. His gaze lingered on her, dark and intense, and for a heartbeat, she forgot the gala, the guests, the lights. There was only him, and the quiet pull of something that had been building since the rain-slicked street. Their hands brushed as she reached for the piano, a fleeting contact charged with electricity. Alina's breath caught, the sensation a mix of anticipation and fear. She wanted to resist, to retreat to the safety of her solitary life, but the temptation, the allure of a world she had never dared imagine, was intoxicating. The music began almost instinctively, her fingers coaxing a melody that flowed between elegance and sorrow, light and shadow. Luca watched in silence, every note capturing the subtle dance of longing, hesitation, and unspoken desire. The piano's resonance filled the room, echoing off the chandeliers, mingling with the whispered awe of the crowd. Yet for Alina the world had narrowed to one presence, the man who had first stopped on a rainy street, whose eyes now held hers with unyielding intensity.
Luca's lips curved in a faint approving smile. It is perfect, he said, because it's you. Only you could play like that here, and only you could make me feel what I feel. A hush fell around them. Alina wanted to pull away, to remind herself that he belonged to danger, and she to survival. And yet, the intimacy of the moment, the brush of hands, the unspoken acknowledgement of what simmered between them, was impossible to ignore. Later, as they walked through the gardens, the night air heavy with the scent of jasmine, Luca's hand hovered near hers, hesitant yet certain. Alina felt the pull, the magnetic gravity that had been building for weeks. She resisted for a moment, stepping back slightly, reminding herself that trust was earned, not given lightly. Do you always test people this way? He asked, a faint smirk touching his lips. I protect myself, she replied, her voice steady despite the rapid beat of her heart. It's necessary, he nodded, but his eyes softened. I understand, and I'll wait, even if it takes everything I have to do so. The night stretched on, filled with stolen glances, subtle touches, and the quiet acknowledgement of what neither could yet fully name. Alina knew the risks. His world was dangerous, his life shadowed by secrets and power, yet the pull was undeniable. For the first time she allowed herself to imagine something different, a life where longing and danger intertwined, where music and love could coexist, fragile yet unstoppable. And as the moonlight glinted off the fountain in the garden, Alina realized that the moment had arrived, when worlds collided, hers small and fragile, his vast and powerful, and neither would ever be the same again. The rain returned the night she left the gala, pounding against the pavement like a relentless heartbeat. Alina walked quickly, her coat clinging damply to her shoulders, replaying the evening over and over in her mind. The grandeur, the music, the brief, stolen moments with Luca, they all lingered, beautiful and impossible, like a melody half-remembered. She had told herself to be cautious, to guard her heart, and yet the warmth of his hand near hers haunted her with every step. But life, as it often did, refused to pause for hope. The next morning, a letter arrived at her apartment, unsigned, untraceable, but unmistakably threatening. It spoke in veiled warnings. Her presence had been noted, her choices were being watched, and her life was no longer solely her own. The streets she had played on for years, once her sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Fear coiled in her chest, cold and sharp. She hurried to Luca, desperate for answers. His office, usually a bastion of control and order, felt ominous today, the shadows heavier than usual. When she arrived, she found him already waiting, calm yet tense, the aura of authority wrapped around him like a cloak. "You received it," he said without preamble, his voice low and measured. Elena nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't understand. Why would anyone do that?" Luca's jaw tightened. "Because my world doesn't forgive intrusion lightly," he admitted. "And because you've stepped into something far more dangerous than music or curiosity. I should have warned you. I trusted you," she whispered, the hurt in her voice raw and undeniable. I thought you were different, that you were on my side." "I am," he said, but the words felt inadequate, swallowed by the weight of unspoken truths. "But sometimes, even those who care most can't prevent every danger. I tried, I failed, and for that his voice faltered, the rarest crack in his otherwise unshakable demeanor. Elena's chest ached. The man she had begun to admire, the one whose presence had stirred hope and longing within her, was both protector and source of danger. And in that moment, the fragile trust they had built wavered, shaken by the reality of his world. I can't do this," she said finally, tears pricking her eyes. "I can't be part of something I don't understand. I can't risk," she swallowed, the words caught in her throat. "I can't risk my life, or my heart." Her voice broke the space between them. Luca reached for her, but she stepped back trembling. "Elena, please." "No," she snapped, voice rising with desperation. Don't say anything else. I need to think, to breathe, to survive, alone." And with that, she turned and left, the door closing softly behind her. Silence fell over the office, heavy and suffocating. Luca stood frozen, the faint echo of her footsteps lingering like a wound that would not close. Outside, the rain washed over the streets, mingling with her tears, as if the world itself mourned the fracture. Elena wandered aimlessly, the piano in her mind silent for the first time in weeks. She felt betrayed, not just by the threat that had emerged from shadows she could barely see, but by the cruel duality of the man she had begun to trust. Hours later, she found herself back at the street corner where she had first played for him. The piano sat untouched, abandoned to the rain's gentle assault. Fingers trembling, she pressed a key, a single aching note that seemed to echo the emptiness she felt. The city moved around her in blurred streaks, indifferent to the pain she carried. Yet in that sound there was release, a fragile thread of solace amid heartbreak. Meanwhile, Luca sat in his office, hands clenched, staring at the empty chair where she had sat that morning. He replayed every word, every glance, every moment they had shared, and realized with a weight that made his chest ache, that he had let her go, or at least she had let herself slip away. The first betrayal had not been orchestrated by enemies. It had been born of fear, misunderstanding, and the cruel truth that love in his world came with danger too heavy to bear. And as the city slept under the relentless rain, both of them carried a wound, fragile and visible and aching, knowing that the thread between them had not yet been severed, but had frayed dangerously. Weeks passed in a haze of muted days and sleepless nights. Elena's apartment felt emptier than ever, the grand piano a silent monument to the moments that had slipped through her fingers. She played, sometimes, but the music was different now, hesitant, heavy with memory, laced with an ache that no chord could fully relieve. The streets she once claimed as sanctuary seemed smaller, narrower, as though the world had shrunk to the pulse of longing that throbbed quietly in her chest. Every day she thought of Luca, not with anger, not entirely, though betrayal had carved its mark, but with an impossible yearning. She remembered his dark eyes, calm yet intense, the warmth of his hand brushing against hers at the gala, the quiet approval in his voice when she played the piano for him. He had stirred something she had long kept buried, hope, as fragile as glass, had been cracked, leaving only shards that reflected both pain and desire. Luca, in his penthouse overlooking the city, felt the absence of her presence like a tangible weight pressing against his chest. His empire hummed with life, decisions and danger, yet every corner, every silent room, echoed with the memory of her laughter, her music, the tentative trust she had offered. He had tried to reach her, to protect her, but the world he inhabited was one that did not forgive proximity, and she had retreated wisely, painfully, leaving him with only his own remorse. He replayed their conversations endlessly. Her words, soft and cautious, haunted him. I can't risk my life, or my heart. The sting of truth in that confession was unbearable. She had chosen safety over longing, and he could not fault her for it. Yet the ache of separation gnawed at him with relentless insistence. Elena's days became a rhythm of routine and avoidance. She wandered the city streets at dawn, listening to the echoes of piano keys in her mind, tracing melodies she had played for him, remembering his presence as if it were a scent lingering in the air. Her apartment smelled faintly of rain, of polished wood, of memories she could neither forget nor fully embrace. And every night, when the city fell silent, she allowed herself the dangerous indulgence of thinking of him, imagining his dark eyes, the warmth of his hands, the quiet acknowledgement that she had mattered. One evening she returned to the corner where she had first played for him. The piano, damp from the occasional drizzle, seemed almost to sigh under her touch. She pressed a key, then another, letting the music fill the empty space. Notes rose and fell like whispered confessions, each one carrying longing, regret, and the ache of unspoken words. A small crowd paused, recognizing beauty in the sorrow, but Elena barely noticed. She was playing for herself now, and for him, though he was far away. Somewhere in the city, Luca felt it too. He could almost hear her music in the night, delicate and haunting, as if she were sending fragments of herself across the distance. He wanted to find her, to close the gap between them, but danger and duty anchored him. Yet he could not stop thinking, could not stop longing. Every decision, every breath carried her shadow. Night after night, they moved through parallel worlds, she in quiet streets, he in silent towers of power. And though they did not speak, though no message passed between them, the unbroken thread of longing tethered them together, fragile and invisible, waiting for the moment when circumstances would allow hearts to speak again. In the stillness, Elena allowed herself to hope, quietly, dangerous. Hope that he would understand, hope that he would return, hope that love, though battered by betrayal and fear, could survive the spaces between them. And somewhere beyond the rain-streaked city lights, Luca too hoped that the woman who had played her soul into his life might one day trust him enough to stay, and that the music she carried would once again fill the spaces between them, soft and unyielding, beautiful and achingly. Elena sat at her kitchen table, the early morning light slanting through rain-speckled windows. The envelope lay in front of her, its edges worn, the handwriting delicate yet unmistakable. She traced the letters with a trembling finger, recognition and dread mingling in her chest. There are truths you have yet to face, Elena. The past does not forgive. Neither do I. Her breath hitched. The words were familiar in a way that made her pulse accelerate, familiar and chilling. Memories she had buried deep resurfaced like ghosts. Her father's absence, hushed conversations in dimly lit rooms, and the fleeting frightened presence of a figure who had once promised protection and vanished. She had thought those days were over, that the life she had carved on the streets with music as her shield had erased the shadows. But now they were back. A knock at the door startled her. She hesitated, heart pounding. Opening it revealed Luca, his dark eyes immediately searching hers, concern and tension written across his sharp features. "Elena," he said, stepping inside, closing the door softly behind him. "I got a tip. Someone's watching you. Someone tied to your family." Elena clutched the envelope. "I thought everything was gone. Buried." "Why now?" Luca moved closer, careful, yet his presence radiated protection. "Danger has a way of finding what's hidden. And you've stepped into something far more complicated than you realize. I tried to shield you, but..." His jaw tightened. "I can't stop the past from catching up with you if you keep running from it." She sank into a chair, trembling. "I wanted to protect you. I thought if I didn't reveal it, if I kept my past locked away, maybe you'd stay safe. I didn't want you involved in any of this." Luca knelt beside her, his hand brushing hers lightly. "Elena, you don't have to carry it alone. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's the only way forward." She looked up at him, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I've been so scared of losing myself, scared of losing you." "You won't lose me," he promised, voice low, almost reverent. "No matter what the past brings, I'll stand by you. But you have to trust me, fully." A silence settled over the room, heavy but tender. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent, uncaring. Inside, two hearts aligned, fragile yet steadfast, ready to face the secrets, danger and shadows that had waited patiently for their return. Elena exhaled, letting a tremor of hope bloom despite fear. The letter, once a harbinger of dread,
now felt like a summons, a message not only from her past, but from a future she could face, as long as she wasn't alone. And as Luca's hand remained in hers, steady and warm, she realized that the first step toward facing the past wasn't running, hiding or resisting. It was trust. The city seemed to pulse with tension, neon lights flickering across rain-slick streets, as Elena moved cautiously through the familiar paths of her past life. Every corner, every shadow felt charged, as if the world itself had conspired to remind her of the dangers she had tried to outrun. Yet, she could not shake the image of Luca, his presence, his intensity, the way he had drawn her into a world both terrifying and irresistible. Hours earlier, a whispered warning had reached her, through a trusted friend, someone connected to her past, had been seen near her favorite performance corner. Fear tightened her chest, cold and urgent. She felt the invisible thread of danger tugging at her, and despite every instinct to retreat, her thoughts turned to him. Luca, his world collided with hers in ways she could not control, yet every moment apart made the pull between them stronger. Meanwhile, Luca moved through his empire like a shadow, every decision calculated, every ally positioned. His mind replayed the confrontation from the alley, her trembling hands, the fleeting glimpse of fear and trust intertwining. He knew danger had never been far, but seeing it brush so close to her, Elena, made it real in ways that anger and power alone could not remedy. As night fell, the two worlds began their inevitable collision. Elena reached the plaza where she had often played her piano, only to find it shrouded in darkness and tension. Figures lingered near the corners, eyes shifting, intentions unreadable. The familiar safety of her musical refuge was gone. Then she saw him, Luca, emerging from the shadows, his expression unreadable but intense. Relief and fear surged through her at once. "Luca," she breathed. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said, moving swiftly to her side, protective and commanding. His hand brushed hers, a spark of reassurance amid the storm of uncertainty. Before they could speak further, a car's headlights cut across the plaza, its engine rumbling ominously. Figures stepped out, their presence deliberate, shadowed with menace. Elena's past and Luca's world had collided in one instant, leaving no room for separation or hesitation. Luca stepped forward, positioning himself between Elena and the newcomers. "Stay close," he instructed, his voice low but firm. "Whatever they want, they won't take you." The strangers exchanged subtle gestures, their eyes calculating, measuring, as if assessing whether to strike or retreat. Elena felt a cold knot of fear tighten in her stomach. She had survived street life, avoided harm, but this was different. This was power and danger colliding, her two worlds forced together in an inescapable tension. "You've hidden things from me," Luca said, almost to himself, the words carrying both accusation and hurt. "Secrets, fear, and now it's put both of us at risk." But his eyes softened as they found hers. "I won't let it destroy us. Not now, not ever." Elena swallowed hard, fear and longing mingling. "I didn't want to hurt you, or bring you." "You didn't," he said, brushing a hand over her hair, grounding her. "But hiding only makes the danger stronger. Facing it together, that's the only way forward." The night held its breath as their worlds collided. Fear, longing, danger, and trust woven tightly together. The city seemed to pause, the rain-soaked streets, reflecting every tension, every heartbeat, every spark of unspoken love. And in that moment, amid shadows and threats, past and present, intertwining, Elena understood what she had known in the quiet of her music, that she and Luca were no longer separate. Their worlds had collided, irrevocably, and only together could they navigate the fragile line between danger and desire. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, leaving the city streets glistening under the muted glow of streetlight. Elena sat alone on the window seat of her apartment, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, staring at the reflections of passing cars in the wet pavement below. The events of the past weeks weighed heavily on her, pressing against her chest like a stone she could not Her thoughts circled relentlessly, the letter from the past, the threats she had barely understood, the confrontation in the plaza, and Luca's unwavering presence. She had tried to shield him, to protect him, but the truth was undeniable. Her secrets, her fears and her hesitation had only made things worse. And now in the silence of her apartment, she could no longer avoid the truth. She had caused the rift between them. Regret settled deep in her bones. She remembered Luca's eyes that night, steady yet tinged with disappointment. "Hiding only makes the danger stronger," he had said. She had flinched, stung by the truth in his words, but too proud, too fearful to admit it fully at the time. Her fingers brushed lightly over the piano keys. She had avoided playing for days, but the music called her, insistent and fragile. One note, then another, and a melody formed, soft, hesitant, weighted with sorrow. Each note carried her remorse, each pause a testament to longing unspoken. The music was a confession she could not yet speak aloud. Meanwhile, Luca stood on the balcony of his penthouse, overlooking the city that had never truly felt quiet. His thoughts traced every interaction, every fleeting moment, every gesture Elena had shared with him. He knew she had acted out of fear, out of love even, but the ache of separation was a constant, gnawing presence. He regretted that circumstances, secrets, threats, danger, had kept them apart, and yet, beneath the regret, he held hope, fragile and persistent, that they could reconcile. He recalled her hands trembling as she had reached for his protection, the quiet admission that she could not face the shadows alone. The vulnerability she had shown haunted him, reminding him that love required patience, understanding, and sometimes, sacrifice. Elena's reflection in the window caught his attention, even from miles away. Though he could not see her, he could feel her presence, the weight of longing, fear and remorse, radiating across the invisible thread between them. He wanted to reach her, to take her in his arms, to reassure her that trust could be rebuilt, that love could endure. Tears welled in Elena's eyes as she whispered into the quiet room, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you, Luke." And far above in his penthouse, Luca whispered into the night, I know, Elena, we'll find our way." The city around them moved on, indifferent, unyielding, yet in their hearts, time seemed suspended. Regret had carved its mark, reflection had deepened their understanding, and though the past could not be erased, they began to sense that the fragile thread binding them could withstand even the weight of their mistake. In that quiet tender space between rain and shadow, silence, and memory, they both understood, love was not free from error, but it was resilient, patient and waiting. And somewhere in the gentle hum of the city, amidst rain-washed streets and distant echoes, they felt the first flicker of hope, the possibility of reconciliation, of trust reborn, and of hearts beating toward each other once more. The sun was barely rising, casting a pale golden light across the city that still gleamed from last night's rain. Elena sat on the bench in the quiet plaza, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of the piano she had brought outside. The air smelled of wet stone and possibility, a fragile mixture that mirrored the tentative hope in her heart. She had spent days wrestling with her past, the letters, the threats, the shadows of a life she had tried to forget. And yet, standing in that familiar place, she felt the weight of truth pressing toward her. The moments she had hidden, the fears she had kept silent, the secrets she had believed necessary to protect both herself and Luca, all of it demanded acknowledgement. A soft footstep behind her made her heart lurch. She turned slowly, and there he was, Luca. His presence, steady and commanding, brought a rush of warmth and tension all at once. She could see the concern in his eyes, the lines of worry that had settled since their separation, and the intensity of emotion that even words could not contain. "Elena," he said softly, closing the distance between them, "it's time to let the truth out. No more hide." Her breath caught. I don't know if I can," she whispered, fingers gripping the bench as though it could anchor her. "What if it changes everything?" Luca knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Then we face it together. Whatever the past holds, whatever dangers come, we do it as one, but you have to trust me, fully. No more secrets, no more walls." Elena's eyes filled with tears. For weeks she had feared this moment, feared that her past would shatter the fragile bond they had begun to build. Yet, in Luca's unwavering gaze, she saw the possibility of forgiveness, of understanding, of a love strong enough to endure the truths she had hidden. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. She told him everything, the family secrets, the people who had threatened her life, the fears she had carried alone. She spoke of the letters, the sudden reappearances of shadows from her past, and the decisions she had made to protect both of them. Each word released a fragment of the weight she had borne silently. Luca listened, silent and attentive, absorbing every confession without judgment. When she finished, he held her face gently, wiping away a stray tear with the softest touch. "Elena," he whispered, "you've carried so much alone, and yet, you were never truly alone. I've always been here, waiting for you to trust me, to let me in." Her lips trembled as she searched his eyes. "I was so afraid of losing you, afraid of putting you in danger." And yet, he said, leaning closer. You didn't lose me, and you never will, not as long as we face the world together. Your past, your fears, they don't define us, only what we do together does. The plaza was silent, except for the faint hum of the city waking around. Elena's hands clutched his, and for the first time in weeks, the tension in her chest eased. The truth, once a burden, threatening to pull them apart, had become a bridge, fragile but unbroken, connecting them more intimately than ever before. Luca pressed his forehead to hers, voice low and tender. We've survived shadows, fear, and silence. Now we can survive anything, together. And as the first rays of sunlight touched the wet pavement, Elena felt the impossible hope blooming in her chest, trust rekindled, and a love stronger for having weathered both danger and deception. The piano between them seemed to hum with the unspoken promise of music and hearts aligned, a melody that no shadow could silence. The city awoke in soft gold and pale blue, the morning sun spilling across rooftops and rain-washed streets. Elena stood on the balcony of her apartment, fingers resting lightly on the railing, feeling the quiet pulse of possibility in the air. The past weeks had been heavy, secrets, danger, misunderstandings, but now in this fragile light, everything felt suspended between ending and beginning. A familiar hum reached her ears, the rhythmic echo of footsteps ascending her stairwell. Her heart leapt before her mind could warn her. Luca appeared in the doorway, every step deliberate, every shadowed worry in his eyes now softened by the relief of closeness. Elena, he said, voice low, reverent, as though speaking too loudly might shatter this delicate moment. She turned to him, tears threatening, but with a smile she hadn't allowed herself in weeks. Luca, she breathed. He closed the distance, taking her hands in his, warm, steady, unwavering. We faced shadows, danger and distance, he whispered, but nothing could keep us apart, not the past, not fear, not silence. Elena pressed her forehead against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and for the first time in what felt like forever she allowed herself to truly exhale. I was so afraid, she admitted, afraid of losing you, afraid of losing myself. But now I know, we can face everything, together. Luca tilted her chin gently, eyes searching hers. I'll carry the weight with you, he said, voice thick with emotion. Whatever comes past, danger, mistakes, we face it as one. You never have to be alone again. The morning light spilled across the balcony, illuminating a city washed clean by rain, the world itself seeming to offer them a quiet blessing. Elena's lips curved into a tentative smile, her tears reflecting the sun's soft glow. Together, she echoed. They lingered in that embrace, letting the warmth and trust rebuild what had been fractured. The piano in the corner of the apartment, once a silent witness to longing and fear, now seemed to hum softly, carrying the promise of melodies yet to come. Music and love, intertwined, unbroken. Later that day they walked through the city streets, hand in hand, savoring the ordinary miracles, the smell of fresh rain on asphalt, the gentle warmth of sunlight on their skin, the quiet understanding that love, though tested and scarred, had survived. In the following weeks, Elena returned to her music, but differently now. Each note carried joy, resilience, and the memory of fear overcome. Luca stood by her side, protector, confidant, and equal partner in a life that had once seemed impossible. The dangers that had haunted them remained, yes, but they no longer dictated the rhythm of their lives. They built a new world together, one stitched from honesty, courage, and enduring love. Shadows could fall, but they had learned to meet them side by side. And in the quiet evenings, when the city's hum softened to a gentle whisper, they would sit at the piano, fingers brushing over keys, hearts brushing over hearts, savoring the extraordinary simplicity of being together. And somewhere in the soft spaces between notes, between heartbeats and breaths, they understood the truth. Love had demanded courage, patience, and sacrifice, but in return it had given them everything: trust, hope, and the promise of forever. Elena smiled, leaning into Luca's chest, listening to the city and to him, and he whispered, as if confessing to the world itself, "This is our beginning." And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, love began again.